Hi, good morning. This is Jerry Lawrence, the Chairman, Delaware County Board of Elections. I am joined today by my fellow election board members, Jim Byrne and Ashley Lonkheimer. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
And we will now call to order the July 30th meeting of the Delaware County Board of Elections, and we will start, as we always do, with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. So we posted our agenda online. We are going to start with a little review of the last election, some of the things that we saw, opportunities for improvement, go over a couple of the things that we are working on, and then we'll run through the formal agenda items. We have a couple of business matters that we need to discuss and make some decisions about. We have a report from our chief clerk about the efforts that she's been pursuing for the last couple of weeks. And then we also have a report from Jim at the voting machine warehouse with some polling site changes and a few other things. So to start, rather than me give a long, monotonous review of what has been underway, which I heard some less than positive feedback from after the last meeting when it took me a half hour to explain the election, to try to make it a little more lively, thought perhaps we'd use a question and answer format, and we'll have some of our staff and some of the county staff who have been working on some of these issues help with the answers. The first question I think is in the minds of voters is, what's being done to make sure I get my absentee or my mail-in ballot application? And I'm going to introduce Howard Lazarus. Howard was hired recently, I think 2 weeks ago, to be the new executive director of the county. Marianne Grace had served in that role for a long time and had been someone who was extremely helpful to the Board of Elections, particularly this spring. Marianne was incredibly hands-on and involved, meeting with us, interacting with us, much more so than I ever recall the board having interaction with the county. In the past, these things all were sort of just done by the county in the background. But I actually really got to see her role and the importance of that. And frankly, in 2 weeks, Howard has hit the ground running and jumped in on a lot of these projects. So Howard, can you tell us what's being done with regards to changing our operation to make it more efficient for the absentee and the mail-in ballot applications?
Certainly, and thank you for the opportunity to join you this morning. There's a couple of key initiatives I'd like to present to you. The first of which is we are in the process of leasing and outfitting some new space down at 2501 Seaport Drive, really for what I would call the backroom operations of the Election Bureau. In that space, we are bringing in new equipment that will help us on both ends of the election, both getting absentee ballots out and also then on the return side in receiving, processing them, and making sure that every vote is counted. Doreen has also engaged with an external entity to help us get a jump start by outsourcing some of the early mailings that we have so that we can make sure that while we're going through this outfitting and startup of the new space, the ballots that go out early will be done and they'll be tracked so that we'll know and be able to match those who requested ballots with those who have received them. So the exciting things about the new space is it gives us the ability to implement more efficient operations. It will also help us on the tail end, as I said, get the results done faster. Doreen has laid out the additional staff that she needs, and we are in the process of hiring additional employees early so that we can assist in the processing of absentee ballots. And we're going to work on streamlining the process for bringing those employees on board.
Thank you, Howard. And as at this point, we're just presenting this informational for those who are watching and may be interested. And we're going to actually have some board discussion about ratifying some of these administrative actions to the extent that may be required by the code, and that we decide to follow through with that. But that'll be later in the meeting. So for now, this is just informational, so we know the activities that the staff has been working on for the last month or so since we got done processing the last election. So, Lorene, Howard alluded to it, but maybe you can talk about some of the things that you've been doing to more efficiently process ballot applications and send the absentee and the mail ballots to the voters.
Yes, one of the main components to that we've gotten calls about, and will also speed the volume of processing, is the Act 77, passed in November of 2019, allowed people when they applied for an absentee or mail-in ballot to request what they're calling an annual. So that is when the cycle you apply for, you will get an automatic ballot for each and every primary or election in that given year. So with that being said, of the 87,000 applications we received for the primary, 55,000 of those have already been carried over to the primary or to the November election from the primary. And of those, we have gone through and checked people who submitted an application late or who were third party and had submitted and were not participating in the primary, but we made sure that we have now entered or are entering them in for the November election so that annual request is still acknowledged. We're also going through the people who applied online from the primary and asked for the annual to make sure that we have proper mail to address. A point of interest for voters is when you are applying online, if you have a second line address, apartment number or unit number, make sure that is going on the same line as your address. So if your address is 201 West Front Street, apartment A1, you would make sure that's all on the same line. The online component is having trouble if you put that into another cell. It's not an active cell. So some apartments and units were dropped. So caution and advisory to all people using the online address, except for your city, state, and zip, goes on that first line on the online requests. So we are actively working on that. I think we're already somewhere in the 60,000 plus requests for November, and actively getting many applications each day. We're hopeful the end of next week to begin starting processing the online requests, which will obviously drive our numbers even faster and higher. So, as we get additional staff, we've requested, as Howard said, additional staff to help with the volume. Asking for those earlier because we are the end of July. We're already quite busy. This is again already unprecedented workload and interest in an election. So that is a healthy democratic process, and we want to make sure we have the staff on boots on the ground in the office to get that done earlier rather than later. We are also going to working with the state. We are striving to make our first mail drop the mid-September, the week of September 14th. That is a time frame after all the milestones with the third parties and the items that happen all throughout the month of August. It's a very active time in the election code for ballot development. So we're hoping to get through that August information and have layouts and ballots ready to go that week of September 14th. And if that's the case, we would be looking at possibly dropping estimates of 75,000 ballots that week. So that's a big lift. And then another thing to help move the ballots through the postal system more efficiently, more timely, is rather than using metering for our mail-out ballots, we'll be trying to secure a permit through the postal, which gives us some options and flexibility and helps with the tracking also of the ballots. So we're very interested and hopeful that will all be secured to better serve our ballot processing and fulfillment. We're also considering options of part in-house continue of ballot fulfillment, but also serious considerations being given to outsourcing. When we say outsourcing of the ballot fulfillment, that means going to a company that we would give a file to for our requests. They'll print the ballots in a very automated and high electronic coding process, be able to match the proper ballot style with the proper envelope style. So that'll increase accuracy and the voter getting the proper ballots. It is something that has been used for a very long time, mostly throughout the West Coast area and somewhat of the Southwest area of our country. But it is technology and positions that are moving east as we're opening various new laws to allow the ballot no excuse balloting options. So we're considering that. That's later on the agenda. So that's all items that will help move this, take some of the weight off of the Bureau of Elections staffing to allow focus on the applications, and also then efficiency for the voters to receive a ballot quickly and timely.
Thanks, Lorene. And Lorene and Howard, I don't know who's best to answer this, but we also have some efforts underway that will allow us to more quickly count the absentee and the mail ballots once they're returned. Perhaps you could describe those efforts.
Yes, if you're referring to some of the equipment we're purchasing?
Yes.
Yes, okay. We're, again, we've found a automated process, which as we receive the daily returned voted ballots, and in an election such as we saw in the primary, and expectations is of possibly doubling those numbers for November, you're talking about thousands of voted ballots returned daily. It's a system that will allow us to take that mail. It will sort the mail, it'll timestamp the mail, it will give us a signature file of the voters for review to make sure accuracy of the voter who signed is the voter whose ballot it is, and then also be able to sort it. So it'll take some manpower, significant manpower hours. If you think to take 175,000 voted ballots, putting them in precinct order, which is 428 precincts for our county, that's significant time each and every day. And this system will give us a daily sorting of those components. So very efficient process and saving significant man hours, and then also, as I said, increasing efficiency and accuracy to a high degree.
Thank you. And, and let me add one other thing. There's one factor that's outside of our control in Delaware County at the Board of Elections, and that is the state law for about when we're permitted to start to process the ballots, both the pre-canvass, what we call the pre-canvass, and the actual, the canvassing or the counting of ballots. Pre-canvass is opening up the envelopes, removing the inner security envelope, putting the ballots together in batches or stacks so that they can be fed through a scanner and read. Under the law, we're only allowed to do that beginning due to the special laws that were passed this spring, the morning of Election Day. There is legislation that has been proposed in Harrisburg before the legislature to allow this pre-canvassing, the preparing of the ballots to be counted, to begin earlier. There's different versions of the bill. Some of them would allow it to begin a couple of days earlier. There's one that's been talked about to allow as much as, I forget if it's 10 days or 2 weeks. But the bottom line is the earlier the Board of Elections can begin the process of pre-canvassing, of arranging the ballots to be counted, getting them lined up, organized so that they can be fed through scanners, the quicker we can get the results processed. So that's something, people have said to me or called in and said, what can I do to help? If you're interested in what you can do to help us to get the ballots counted faster, you can talk to your legislators and say, please act to permit the boards of elections to begin to count earlier. I know that our county has been lobbying their legislatures. I know our neighboring counties, Montgomery County, has been asking for the same relief because, as Lorene said, 175,000 ballots is what our guess is. We had 86,000 applications in the spring. It takes a long time to count them. So the earlier we can start preparing to count them, the faster we can count them, the faster we can announce results. The next question on the list that we've been getting is, will the county establish in-person voting locations before Election Day? The changes in the laws last year allowed us to do that. And Howard, could you talk about what efforts are underway about establishing in-person pre-Election Day voting locations?
Sure. We are looking at providing the opportunity for people to come in and access pre-election services both at the courthouse here in Media, the government center, and other locations. A lot of that involves some technology, and part of what we're doing is procuring additional equipment that can be used at different locations. The idea is that you can come in and turn in your absentee ballot at that point. So that's something that's a work in progress, and we'll get more information to you as we flesh out the plan more.
Okay. Let's talk about polling places for the primary. There's still people have questions about why did my polling place change from its traditional location for the primary, and then the logical second question: what's going to happen to my polling place in the fall? Maybe Jim and Manley could work to address those questions.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, Jim.
Okay. So for the primary, we had a combination of issues. First of all, polling locations that were unable or understandably unwilling to host the election due to the health crisis. We began that process with a proactive effort, as you know, to move all our polling places out of vulnerable communities, senior living facilities, things like that. And then we had quite a large number of locations that notified us that they were unable to host due to the health crisis. We also were aware that we were going to have a severe shortage of poll workers for local election boards. And when the law was passed when the legislation was passed that allowed us to do the consolidation, we had moved some of those polling locations in a traditional way through, as you know, through a vote of all of you on the Board of Elections prior to that legislation. Then once that legislation was passed, we did what we refer to as that mass consolidation. The way that legislation was written, those polling places automatically revert back to their historical location once the election was over. So we're working now with various municipalities, party leaders, local election boards, borough managers, you name it, and we're trying to get bipartisan agreements in place to some places will revert back, some places will remain or propose to remain where they voted in the primary, and I will be presenting some of those changes later in this meeting. And we're still working on some more for the August meeting. The board will also consider any petitions that we receive. We have not received any to date, so none will be considered today, but possibly at the August meeting if we were to receive any. So just, this sort of combination of factors that almost completely dealt with, the health crisis, put us in a position where we needed to consolidate these polling places, and that's what we did. So and we had a very compressed time frame to do that, as you know. So it didn't go as smoothly as we would hope. We have plenty of time now to do this, hopefully in a more methodical fashion, and that's what we're doing.
Thank you, Jim. One thing that I've been asked is, we centrally scanned the ballots at the last election. We made the decision that we wouldn't be able to adequately train people that with the consolidation of the precincts and the rush way in which that was done, we couldn't properly program and test the equipment, and so we're required to test it under the law. So we central scanned the ballots. I'm happy to say that is our intent to deploy the precinct scanners for this fall. We have additional time to get people trained. We had the ballot marking devices deployed at the last election. People have some familiarity and comfort level with that. And Jim is working on a training schedule for precinct workers to get familiarity with the scanners, and we'll deploy and use the scanners to scan and count the ballots in the precincts on election day, which will, of course, greatly speed up the reporting of results. So that is, I think, good news for persons who are looking for timely election results.
Jerry, can I just add one thing to that?
Sure, go ahead, Jim.
Oh, on the scanners, we're gonna test and load the elections in the scanners in a manner that the scanners will be able to accept the ballot for any precinct in any particular location, for locations that host more than one precinct. So if there's 3 precincts that vote at one high school gym, for instance, and one precinct's getting busy and the other 2 aren't, we won't have people standing in line waiting for one particular scanner. They can use any scanner at the location. But those will only be for the changes that are made at today's meeting and the late August meeting. After that, then we configure the scanners the way they're going to be. Any changes that are made after that, the scanners will still be deployed, but they'll be deployed by individual precincts. So if you have a location with three precincts, there's going to be, a specific scanner for each precinct in that location.
Thank you, Jim. And the point of that is, if you're looking for a change in a polling place, let's get them in between now and the last week of August so the changes can be made, equipment can be programmed, as opposed to having 3 scanners, which could lead to confusion. If there's, a scanner for precinct 1, precinct 2, precinct 3 that are in the same location, we can program the equipment so that all the scanners in that location can scan the ballot, as opposed to just one scanner. And I think it'll make things go smoother on election day.
If I can add a comment to what Jim said. Part of what was missing and that we intend to do for the upcoming election is kind of a voter awareness program. And not only does that mean firming up where the locations are, but having some public service type announcements and information on what voters can expect when they show up at the polls that addresses the equipment that's fielded and what their role is in using it, but also making people feel comfortable that there'll be adequate protections for their health when they show up at a polling place, including PPE and sanitizing equipment or resources that'll be available, as well as making sure people maintain social distancing while they're waiting in line. I think as we do that, those who choose to vote in person will have a greater level of comfort, and having an educated community is our best ally in making sure that election day voting goes as smoothly as possible.
Thank you, Howard. Lorene, can you talk about recruiting poll workers?
Yes, obviously in pre-COVID times, we were having difficulty finding poll workers. We will have pinpointed some additional staff to work on recruiting them, encourage people to send us emails if you're interested. Also, poll workers who are not going to be able to serve in November. It doesn't mean that if you are already the elected poll worker and you're unable to serve that you lose that position for the remainder of the term. It's just simply that you're not going to serve that day. If you can let us know that sooner than later, preferably again in an email or letter format, but if the best is a phone call, that's fine too. And so that we can identify those areas and again, engage in a healthy outreach, working with the leaders to try to find people to fill those positions. Again, it's a new voting system that's going to be out there in full use this election. It's a high volume election with a presidential election. So securing these poll workers will be definitely an early push and also an aggressive push so that everybody has time to be trained and work cohesively together for that positive election day experience.
Thank you, Lorraine. The next question is a big question that for a lot of people is, will results be announced on election night? And given our plans to deploy the in-precinct scanners, there will be substantial results on election night. Historically, when we had, before this primary election, we would on election night release the unofficial in-person voting count. In other words, we get a count on each machine, each scanner, in each precinct. We're able to total those in the Board of Elections and announce that number on election night. We will be able to do that this fall by deploying the scanners. The absentee and the mail-in balloting, it's a little more difficult to predict when that number will be announced. And also, as we have seen, the absentee and the mail-in balloting is now a very substantial portion of the total amount of ballots cast. In the past, it was less than 5%, less than 3% maybe in some elections. So it was a very small number. It didn't often affect the outcome of the election. However, now many more people are voting by mail-in or by absentee, and accordingly, it will take longer. If the law is changed, as we discussed, to allow pre-canvassing activities prior to election day, we will obviously be able to announce results much faster. If the law remains as it is, it will probably again take days and days for us to get those results. And maybe, Lorraine, since you are really the knee deep and in the trenches on this, could you try to estimate? And we understand that there's, it's a bit of guesswork, but if we were to get 175,000 ballots, as we are predicting as possible, and the law doesn't change and we can't start counting to the morning of election day or pre-canvassing to the morning of election day, how long do you think it would take?
Looking at the entirety of that would be scanning and counting all the, like you said, the by mail cast ballots, reading the V drives for the election day in precinct experience votes, and that's simply downloading it, not like we had to do in the spring where we were scanning through each of the ballots. It would just be the drive coming back to us. And then going through the provisionals, I can see it being a solid 2 weeks of working to get that final count. But for election night reporting, the V drives read very quickly. So we should have that total count for what was the election day in-person experience count. And then our by mail, if we're not able to start till the morning of election day, I think with the volume we're looking at, you could look at least 10 days to have that completed. And then, as I said, the additional would be the time for the provisionals. But that, again, is something that does not start with the review of those ballots and then deciding what can be counted and to what level it can be counted until the Thursday after the election. So just by nature of the election code, you can't touch those ballots any earlier than that time. So in totality, I would say at least 2 weeks, but there are different segments where you would have full reporting of that particular base of votes, if that is clear enough.
Well, it is complicated. There's no question, but I think the key takeaway is, we will have the in-person results, the preliminary number, the unofficial number on election night, like we've always had. And as far as counting the provisional ballots, we start on Thursday, depending on the number, a day, a couple of days, which is the same as it always was historically. The big issue is the mail-in and absentee ballots. And if the law doesn't change and we can't begin that work until election day, as Lorraine said, it's going to be 10 days, 2 weeks. Obviously, if the law changes and we can start the week before, that just shifts everything forward. So instead of waiting till 10 days after the election, maybe you only have to wait a day or two after the election or whatever, depending on how many days it's shifted. So that's really the key to this is when can we start counting them, because it physically takes a long time to process those ballots, and we want it done carefully and accurately, and we have to be careful and take our time. The last question I have here is kind of a customer service question. There were people that said, hey, I kept calling the Board of Elections to find out if they got my ballot on the couple of days before the elections, and nobody answered the phone, and what's being done about that. And a couple of things. One, we are hiring additional staff, as we talked about. Two, we're going to do a better job of letting people know that you can check your ballot status online at www.pavotes.com. And then, as Howard said before, that we're going to have a voter education campaign to try to get as much information out to voters as we can, so that people have answers and know where to look, and perhaps don't have to call the office and tie the phones up, and we can do a better job of responding to questions then if there's less questions and more people to answer them. So I hope that was helpful to give people a kind of sense of what we're doing, the lay of the land. We can turn now to the formal agenda, which are some items that we have to take action on. The first item to take action on is that we retained a consultant that did an organizational assessment for us. That report was formally delivered to the board members earlier this week. We are going to make that public by posting it on our website, so that people can review it. It made a number of suggestions about restructuring the operation, hiring more people, assigning different duties to new people to handle, because the scope of the work, for instance, the mail-in absentee ballots, which were used last spring's primary as an example, would have been expected to be maybe 5,000. They were 85,000. So to the extent that Lorene did that as part of the many, many things that she does, that has now become an overwhelming task, and we're going to get someone else to handle specifically that task. We're going to have a director for finance to deal with all the reporting requirements that we have to deal with, and to free people up so that we can focus more time and attention on different things. Those were recommendations from the consultants. We have to take action formally, discuss those recommendations now, and the board can decide whether or not they want to follow through on those recommendations. So I think the first item to talk about is the approval of the new space. The county undertook an effort to find us more space. Obviously, this mailing operation is substantially more than it was historically. We were crowded 5 years ago in the space that we had, and we didn't have adequate space. And then with these added duties, it's just become completely untenable. So, Howard, do you want to present some information about the new space, and then perhaps we could have a motion for approval of acquiring that space?
Certainly. So as I mentioned before, the space is located at the Wharf at Rivertown at 2501 Seaport Drive in Chester. The owner of that space is Rivertown TCI Limited Partnership, and that entity is affiliated with the Philadelphia Union Major League Soccer Club. The term of the agreement is 5 years, 5 months, with one 5-year option. The rent is about $19.50 per square foot. It increases at 3% per year, but it includes 5 months of free rent, which we're going to defer until 2021, because this move right now is driven by coronavirus and is eligible for coronavirus relief funds during the current fiscal year. The lease starts on September 1st. We do have a move-in allowance. It provides free parking for visitors and for staff up to 81 spaces. We are currently, we have a schematic drawing. We are starting the process of reviewing those drawings for permitting as well as furnishings. So the space will provide both fixed areas that staff can be more efficient in, but it will also feature room for the equipment that we propose to buy, as well as some flexible space that we can use to accommodate the demands of the different elections. It is primarily the backroom process where the government center here in media will continue to be the primary point for retail type services or outward looking services for the public.
Okay, thank you, Howard. And just to be clear, the county council will actually approve, sign the lease, and be the ones who are obligated to pay for the space. It's the county space, the same as our office in the government centers in the county space. But to the extent the election code could be interpreted to require the Board of Elections to take formal action to designate it as an election facility, I'd ask if we could have a motion to do so.
Yes, Jerry, I think it's great that we found more space, and I think anybody who participated in the election day operations, certainly many volunteers and other members of the public understand how much this space is needed. So thank you for all the hard work that everybody has done. And so I would move, I think, Jerry, and just make sure I have the motion right, because county council ultimately, as you indicated, is the one who would sign the lease and then obviously pay for the space. But from the election board standpoint, I would move to have the new space that Howard identified designated as a election office for the county. And I would recommend to the board that they fulfill all the leasing requirements and other things needed to make sure that we can use that space on election day for the election board and all of the operations of the election function.
For clarification, you're recommending to council to do that?
I'm sorry, whatever I said, yes, I'm recommending.
You recommend to the board, but you meant to recommend to county council?
I did. I'm sorry, I recommend to county council. But in terms of what we need to do, I think, Manley, to be clear, would we designate that as the board?
Yes, your motion with respect to the designation is appropriate and necessary.
Okay, thank you. So
let's just put it this way. It might be necessary, so let's be safe.
Okay. Two motions then, Jerry, I don't know if you want to take them collectively since they're so interrelated, but one is to designate the new space as a county election office, and the other is to recommend to county council that they fulfill the lease requirements and help assist and pay for the carrying out of the operations that Howard described to take place at that new space.
Okay, so there's a motion. Is there a second?
Jim, we can't hear you.
Yeah, you're still on mute, Jim.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I'll second the motion, and I just have a couple of questions if we could have some discussion before we vote.
Sure, absolutely. Let's have some discussion.
Okay. Should I go first, Jerry? Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. The space that we're getting now is 16,000 square feet. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's correct.
Okay, and it's at 1950 a square foot to start.
That's correct.
And with a 3% increase each year, right?
Correct.
I didn't understand what you meant when you said the $5 rent free.
No, I'm sorry if I wasn't clear. The agreement provides for 5 months of free rent that we don't pay for it.
Oh, okay.
We're going to defer that till next year because the space this year is driven by the increase. The space need is driven by the increase in mail-in ballots stemming from coronavirus. We have another funding source for it that doesn't come out of the general fund. So financially, it makes more sense to use the free rent next year.
Okay. You had mentioned a couple times, and both in some earlier questions and when you were explaining it, you said it was primarily back room space, and I guess I get a little nervous, first of all, at having anybody think we're doing anything in the back room when it comes to voting. Maybe you can just explain what that means.
Sure. We're really talking about the election processing. That space will be available for inspection as it's required, to the public, but it's not a primary service location for the routine things that people want to do in terms of voter registration and those kind of functions. So it's not under the cover of darkness, shrouded in secrecy. It's just its main purpose is the processing of the ballots. And again, it will be transparent and open to inspection as we're required to do and as we want to do.
Okay, and what's the size of our current space as opposed to what we're going to have now?
I can tell you it's a lot smaller. I don't have the square footage. A lot of that space too, particularly in voter registration, is taken up by storage of paper. So we'll be able to better accommodate the storage of records in the new space as well. And that'll allow us also to make the voter experience in the space and media to be more pleasant.
Okay.
But the space right now, I would venture, I don't know if Lorene has a guess on it, but I would probably guess it's 6,000-7,000 square feet at most.
If you're combining both departments, it might be 6,000, but if you're considering visualizing just the bureau and not counting in the various storage closets I've been given across the entire complex, but because we are definitely spread out to try to utilize every space we need. So it'll be efficient to have everything together for production purposes at the new facility, but it is significantly larger, which is something we need. I mean, I believe we're the fifth largest county, but we have a very small location.
And Lorena, Jerry, Jim, may I just ask one question? So just to be clear,
absolutely.
during election day, counting all the processes that have been described in the earlier Q&A, they required a tremendous amount of space, particularly the processing of the mail-in ballots. And space that was utilized was space that wouldn't be available if the county government center is open. They included the use of the jury assembly room as well as the use of county council's meeting room. Now, obviously,
and the cafeteria.
And the cafeteria. Thank you. So I mean to say that, right. So when we say back office or processing, I mean, is it anticipated that this space would fulfill some or all of those needs, such that if those spaces weren't available, we wouldn't have anywhere to go, and we need the space, right?
The space was I'm sorry. The space was also laid out as we've done kind of process flow charts to make sure that things move smoothly. There's less chance of having to move from one place to the other. The equipment and the supplies that are needed on one operation are all co-located. So it will give us a great space to accomplish the functions we need to. It'll also, there's windows in the space, so it'll be a much better work environment for staff, and it'll help us to recruit and retain the high quality staff that we have and need.
But also, Howard, sorry, Jim, I'm sorry, just to finish my point, it is necessary though, right? I mean, if we couldn't have used the jury assembly room, the cafeteria and the council meeting room, we wouldn't have had space to do the processing. I mean, is that right, Lorena? I mean, that's
most definitely. I have room in my work area, not the storage areas, but my work area. I have room for 6 processors, and we need to at least double that, if not approach closing triple that for our volume. Our office was set up for the absentee component under the old components of the law, where we might have been dealing in a busy election with 10 or 15,000 ballot requests. As I said, as you've all pointed out, in the primary, we went to 87,000. So that's a huge increase, and proportionally the workload needs to be lifted by more staff and many components now, whether we're pre-canvassing or canvassing, and all the various items that have to be accomplished and tasks. We need significantly more space. And I also, voter registration, I believe, is in the same position. They've maxed in their location, their space, and also need more space to complete tasks under the new laws.
Right. Yeah, and I understand that, but I guess I'm a little bit concerned with how much space we're getting. I mean, we're going from, what is collectively between the election bureau and the voter registration, maybe 5,000 or 6,000 square feet, up to 16,000 square feet, at close to $20 a square foot. I mean, I understand we're getting some CARES money, but that seems to me like an awful lot of space and an awful lot of money to spend. Are we going too far overboard on this? in terms of space? I mean, we're going to have a whole lot of space for the rest of the year when we're not doing this counting and this, the things that are last maybe a week or two around election time. It's going to be a whole lot of leftover space, and it just concerns me a bit.
Well,
How about the furnishings?
Yeah, I think the issue is if you looked at the space that we needed to conduct the primary election, we certainly used more than 16,000 square feet. And I understand, Jim, that there will be days that we use every inch of it, and there will be times that we don't. But we are acquiring this additional mailing equipment and the space for that. When you look at when the one election cycle ends and the next one starts, there is some downtime, but we are having to process and send out these absentee ballot applications very early in the cycle in order to get them out in a timely way. So we do need a lot of space. And we do need it for a significant portion of the year. We looked at some other space, and we looked at some space for that was down in Ridley, and I think it was 12,000 square feet, more or less. And the thought was both from our staff persons that looked at it and the Eisner-Antner people that were doing this assessment, that space was inadequate and it was too small, that we needed more space. So, I feel good that our professionals and our staff that looked at this and recommended this space think it's adequate and appropriate. And I think I'm going to support this. Is there any more discussion, or can we call the question?
No, Jerry, I'm going to support it as well. I just want to note that I think some of the equipment that Howard described can be as large as 1,000 square feet itself or so. I mean, there's some big equipment needs that will be permanently located in that space. So it may sound like a lot more than it is when we increase the capacity to efficiently and data-driven, way to conduct this election, and so that we don't run into some of the obstacles that we faced in the primary. So I'm going to support this motion as well. Okay.
Well, my other question, and I'll stop into this. What are the furnishings that are going to go in there? I mean, how many? You have mentioned, Howard, that there were going to be furnishings that were put in. How much money are we spending on furnishings, and what are those furnishings?
So the furnishings are primarily workstations. The furnishings are workstations for the staff. There's storage furniture for materials and records, and then there are some movable items of furniture that allow us to configure the space for different needs depending on the needs of the election. Just as an observation I've made is that we don't run one election; we run over 400 elections based on the different municipalities and the number of precincts that report. I'd also add that buying the equipment does require a lot of space, but it's a trade-off between the number of staff we would need to do this efficiently in the future versus taking advantage of technology and automation. I don't have a number right now as to what the furniture will cost. We are going to proceed with procurement of that under an existing state contract, so we know we will get a competitive price as well as timely delivery of it. And it is our intent right now that funding comes from the CARES Act funding that's available, because again, the increase in mail-in voting is driven by the pandemic that exists right now.
Yeah, but the CARES Act is only going to be around for 1 year, and the CARES Act is not just printing money. I mean, that money's coming from somewhere, and I feel uneasy about how much space and how much money we're spending. The taxpayer is going to pick this up in a year or two. Actually, going to pick it up.
But the taxpayer, the taxpayer has a right to vote, Jim. If we don't have space to conduct the election, what are we going to do? Do it in your driveway?
No, I don't. I think we might be moving too fast and just getting a spot that's too big. I mean, we've been conducting elections for a couple hundred years now. And in space that's more than 3 times smaller. So
with 86,000
having observed this for the last 15 years, the space was too small for most of that time. And that was before we had a 17-fold increase in the capacity for the mailing and requiring substantially more staff. And we need a place to put them. And in order to accomplish what the task that we had for the last election, we had to get, 10,000 extra square feet from the county that we won't be able to get in the future. So I understand your concern, and I'm concerned about the taxpayers' money, but at the same time, I recognize we need to conduct an election and we need appropriate space to do that. And this is the recommendation of our staff.
Yeah, and I'm not quarreling with you, but what I'm saying is I think we're going too fast. I mean, there's a lot of office space in the county. And we're trying to get a lease done by September 1st, because I know we have an election, but maybe we need something temporary where we don't get committed to such a huge sum of money for so long of a period. That's my thoughts.
Well, I hear your thoughts. I don't think 5 years is all that long. If those are your thoughts, then let's call the question. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed?
Nay.
And the motion carries. The next item on our agenda is the proposed restructuring of the staff. And there was a report that was presented by Eisner that contemplated creating some additional positions. The thought would be that we currently operate as three separate silos, if you will. The chief clerk, Lorene, runs the Bureau of Election Operation. Crystal Winterbottom operates the voter registration, and Jim Savage operates the machine warehouse. And they all have unique tasks and responsibility, but there's no person in our professional staff that is involved in the coordination of all their activities. So the first portion of this restructuring would be to create an elections director, which would be a person that oversees all of the operations in order to create efficiencies and coordination amongst the different tasks. It was also recognized that we needed additional personnel, both as clerks and also to create the two new roles that we talked about earlier, a deputy for finance and in-person voting, who would deal with the financial reporting obligations, and will also have significant portions of their time to devote to staffing of the elections. It has been a tremendous issue this year, but you know what? It's been a significant and tremendous issue for the last couple of years, staffing polling places. And the burden of that has fallen to Lorene, who does work closely with the political parties and the League of Women Voters and some other community groups who work with us to get that done. But we need more resources to be able to fill those positions so that we don't continually have the vacancies that we have. And then the second position to be created would be a director of the mail-in voting. And that person would be responsible for, as we've been discussing this morning, all the processes involved in receiving applications and preparing ballots and mailing in of the ballots and receiving of the ballots. So I think what would be appropriate is for us to get a motion to create these new positions, and then we can get that on the table, and then we can have a discussion over whether that's how we want to proceed.
Jerry, then I would move to create the positions of Director of Elections, I believe a Deputy Director of Finance and in-person voting, or some combination thereof, and Deputy Director of mail-in voting, and perhaps poll worker training or other recruitment as the administrative team deems necessary.
Second that.
Okay, discussion.
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts on it. It's okay if I go. Actually, I don't want me to cut.
Yeah, no.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, my thoughts on this are, you know, I think we could use some help. I'm not disagreeing with that. Again, though, I'm a little concerned that we're going overboard with creating two separate positions here. I thought we were looking at one, and I guess the Eisner-Amper report suggests two. But again, there's got to be some end to spending money. I mean, I just feel like we're just turning on the opening the floodgates and just spending money like we're going out of style. The other part that I'm very concerned with is the position that we are in, we being the board collectively, and it's pretty clear under the charter when the charter was enacted. You know, there was actually a vote that said, you know, we're going to have an election board that's a bipartisan election board, and we're supposed to be the ones carrying out those duties. And I'm just a little afraid we start getting too many directors and giving all our work and all the administrative duties to these directors, and you know, do we just become a rubber stamp? I mean, I certainly don't want to spend all this time just to become a rubber stamp. I don't want to do all the work of each of the directors either, but I think that there's got to be some kind of happy medium there. I mean, again, it seems like we're doing an awful lot in a very quick period of time. And the last thing I think that goes along with that, with respect to filling local positions at local election boards, I mean, I think that's a duty of the local jurisdictions. I don't think that we should be sticking our hands in there and certainly not hiring a person to go out recruiting people. I mean, I don't think that's within our jurisdiction. I think that's a local, mainly, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's solely a local decision, and the electorate has to decide that they have to vote for the judge of elections and who fills those positions. And it shouldn't be a position that's created by county council and paid by county council to direct who's going to be running the local elections.
I can address a couple of those comments that relate to legal issues. On the last point, Jim, the issue is certainly under the structure of the election system and the election code, positions on local election boards at the precinct level are elected positions. The structural problem we have is that far too often we don't have candidates running for those offices. And so we have vacancies. Now, historically, the practice has been that the political parties would be relied upon to find people to propose using a sort of an emergency appointment or appointment process to fill those roles. However, that system has in fact been breaking down rather substantially over the last several years, to the point that there are entire swaths of the county, I would say, particularly in areas that are now more heavily Democratic, where there are no Republican participants in the process at the polling places. And what that does is create a substantial staffing shortage, which interferes with the ability of this board, which is charged with carrying out elections in the county, to do that. And so this board has a clear obligation to ensure that elections are carried out. It's not, as I read the code, the board can't simply say, well, we delivered the machine to the polling place. Our work here is done. You know, it's up to the local participants in that precinct to staff that polling place. And hey, if it doesn't get staffed, that's their problem, not the board's. On the contrary, that's very much the board's problem, because the board does have the obligation to ensure that the election gets carried out according to the code. And that can't happen if those polling places have election boards that are understaffed or unstaffed. So I think that given the direction this is going, it's absolutely necessary for this board to move forward with this proposal in order to ensure that its obligations to deliver an election for every precinct, for every voter in the county, that is in accordance with the statutory requirements are met. Now, you had raised some concerns about whether some of these intermediate director or manager roles would undermine or inappropriately take away from the responsibilities assigned to the board under the charter and under the election code. I've looked at this very closely. My conclusion is that this would not impact the board's role or inappropriately remove from the board its authority in any way. The board remains in charge of elections. These positions are designed just like a chief clerk or a deputy clerk or any other administrative position within an office within the county government or specifically within the election departments. These are designed to facilitate the accomplishment of workflow. The decision-making on the policy questions does not get deferred to these people. These people are there to accomplish the directives that come from this board. And the way I would analogize this is that the system is not unlike a system of corporate governance where you have different vice presidents of different divisions. What's being proposed is essentially a CEO to oversee those vice presidents, but that doesn't divest the corporate board of directors from its roles and responsibilities.
No, it doesn't. And I don't mean to interrupt you, but you know, the companies don't have an election that takes place on a local level to carry out these functions. So I don't think that, I mean, with all due respect, I don't think that that's very analogous. I think that this is a whole different animal. I mean, this is a local jurisdiction for people in those local areas. And if the locals aren't doing what they should be doing, then I would think our job would be to get the locals to do what needs to be done. And if they don't, then maybe we go and hire some people. But again, do we even know what the salaries we're talking about with these people are? I mean, for these two directors?
Well, that's
I think that would also
matter for county council.
that is budget. Yeah.
Well, it is, but we're giving the okay. We're spending people's money. I mean, we're recommending spending people's money.
Yeah, I think the motion in order would be a recommendation to county council, but because we don't control the purse strings, we would, I think, be limited to making a recommendation to county council at most.
Just briefly.
And Jim, I think the point is, you know, we have for years, right? Lorene carries out the policy that we make. This is analogous to that. The issue is Lorene has pulled in 10,000 directions, and to the extent that Lorene has for years focused time on working with the local people to fill these spots, Lorene doesn't have that capacity to do it anymore because the problem has spiraled to where it is. So what we're recommending is that resources, another person, be brought in to help the local people to fill those spots. The code still dictates how those spots are filled, and we're still going to follow the code. It's just that, you know, you and I and Ashley don't have time to go to each precinct and find out what they need, assist the local people in calling them up and saying, hey, we need somebody in municipality XYZ precinct 3, 4, or whatever. We have to get somebody to do it, and that's what this is. This isn't taking anything away from the local people. This isn't end running the code and the requirements that are necessary to fill those spots. This is properly staffing the Board of Elections to assist people to get those spots filled, because the system we've been using for however many years to get them filled just isn't working like it used to.
I just want to add, first of all, Jim, we got to spend more time together, because if you think we're moving too fast, I spend, you know, every night thinking about how we need to keep just absolute constant movement towards making this election successful. There's just so much going on, and as you know, the ever-changing landscape related to the pandemic just extremely complicates the matters. But in terms of what we've asked of Lorene and her team and spending money, this concept of spending money, which clearly we are recommending that money be spent. You know, the hours that the current election workers, our current staff put in to make that election primary a carry off was just, we need to supplement that. They cannot be working those hours. But separate from that, as Jerry said, the responsibilities have changed. And so Laureen herself, in my view, having observed it regularly and in person and during election day and many times before that, she's now being asked to do multiple other jobs that maybe was able to be done in other circumstances, but can't be now. For example, it's not just about these 3 silos. It's coordinating the warehouse, voter reg, Lorraine's team, so that there's cross training and so that someone can reach out to purchasing and say, hey, we need PPE for our poll workers to help keep them safe. And hey, you know, Jim needs more equipment and he needs more temporary staff. Let's get to HR and let's hire either permanent staff if it's appropriate and they'll work year round, or seasonal staff or temporary staff. And if you look at all the money that was spent, I think on the temps during the primary election, and then you think about potentially doubling or even more than doubling the mail-in ballot collection from our public who are understanding how that process works better and also are likely to face pandemic conditions again in November. I don't know if it washes out to an even, but what I can tell you is we need to have someone in the position that can help bring all together all the pieces from all of county government, can work with Howard, for example. I mean, Howard is sitting here reporting in the weeds and on details related to the election function. He doesn't actually report to us. We do need somebody to oversee this from an election board position. And then Lorraine's team is working crazy hours to try to supplement. They didn't have enough deputies to supervise shifts for volunteers.
Yeah, well, I have a question on that. I don't mean to interrupt you, but I do have a question on that. I mean, we had some 400 or 500 people furloughed from the county at the time. I mean, why didn't we just use some of them instead of going out and getting temporary people?
I think that
actually,
my understanding. Go ahead,
reached
Jerry.
out to them first.
Yeah.
They said
I
no.
thought we called 400 people. 3 people said that they would come in, and then in the end, only maybe 2 or 1 of them actually decided to come in.
As the first time, I've not heard of that before. Maybe I missed it, but I would be shocked if there were 400 people that were called and 397 said no.
My understanding is that every single furloughed person was sent a communication giving them the opportunity to come in and do this work as a first step before a single temporary person was brought in on this, and that the numbers were in accordance with what Ashley said, that 1 or 2 people out of all of those furloughed was willing to come in. And look, keep in mind, this was during the middle of a pandemic where the proposition was you get to go work in a 3,000 square foot office with 12 people you've never met before. You can understand why a lot of people said, yeah, no thanks. I'm not signing up to bring that disease back into my house.
Yeah, but the pandemic is going to end at some point in time. And when the pandemic ends,
this was just in terms of the process of why 400 people or 398 said no, that right. A lot, I mean, that rearward looking, I think that had a lot to do with it.
But data also shows that mail-in voting doesn't decrease over time, it will increase. So even if the pandemic has jump-started it to a level that we're not familiar with, then it's still going to continue to increase at levels that, as Lorraine put forward, numbers are just already 8-9 times the amount they ever received in the absentee ballots. And I do actually have the numbers. I believe these are accurate. It was 260 members of the union were called, and 3 members said yes. So ultimately, I know it was very important that they be contacted first and given that opportunity, Jim. So, and my understanding is they were. So I think, Jerry, if there's no further discussion, I mean, I'm going to support the creation of these positions. I think Eisner-Amper did a fair and full evaluation, and I support the recommendations, and therefore I support the motion on the table.
All right, we'll call the question. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Nay.
All right, the motion carries. The next 3 items on the list, on the agenda, I don't know if they call for a vote. I think it's just more they were informational. We kind of talked about some of them earlier, that there has been a lot of work going on by the county, that we've had a couple of joint sessions with the county council members and the members of the Board of Elections to discuss our priorities and to try to keep us on the same page. Historically, we've done the same thing, for instance, when we bought new voting machines, to have informational meetings that obviously we are independent public bodies and we have to take action, formal meetings and vote. But at the same time, we can have information presented to us that we will then consider and rely on in making decisions going forward. So we've done that. There's been weekly working group meetings amongst the election board staff, specifically amongst our department heads, Lorene, Crystal, and Jim, with Howard, Marianne, Grace before that, obviously, and the county solicitor, our solicitor, the head of purchasing, the head of personnel, to work together to try to accomplish these administrative goals. The election board members have been invited to those. The council members have been invited to those. From time to time, some of the election board members have listened in on those meetings, and some of the council members have as well. The next item here that will require some action is the mail-in ballot process, and specifically, I think Lorene is going to discuss a proposal about outsourcing part of that process. She talked about it a little bit before, but Lorene, perhaps you could make a formal presentation about what the outsourcing would involve, your recommendation, and then we can make a motion to consider it.
Jerry, I'm disappointed that Jerry, I'm disappointed I was going to vote with you on those last three items you just described.
I guess we could vote that they're all a good idea, but I don't know that we really need to do anything there.
Okay. So the option for outsourcing is becoming a much more realistic and necessary component. I know we've talked about doing it in-house, and I believe there's still interest to do that in other election cycles, but the need to just secure all of our processes and make sure that everything is done timely and as accurately and efficiently as possible. We would like to outsource our by mail component, our mail-in component, with the company that we are already partnered with to print all of our precinct ballots. Since they are already printing ballots, it is a good flow to, they're familiar with our files that we send for printing those items, and they know our precinct structure and all of that. So Michigan Election Resources, referenced as MER, I would ask that they be considered for printing our election day ballots, as well as our ballot fulfillment for the mail-in components. We'll continue to do the absentee and the UACAVAs, just so that there is a singular focus from MER on the mail-in files versus absentee files. The service would be, as I explained earlier, is that they would get files from us. They will create the ballots or print the ballots. They will create and print the envelopes necessary, and in a camera reading scan or scanning process that encodes items to guarantee that the system is matching ballot style A with the matching ballot style A envelope. And then also complete that with all the other necessary components inside the ballot packet, such as the secrecy envelope or instructions. Package all that out, sort it into a level that the post office is requiring for such large mailing components that we are utilizing in the counts of the ballots we receive. And then they will also be able to distribute that locally. They will have a process to move those ballots in a timely fashion so that people get them as quickly as possible. So I would ask the board to consider that function for the November election as a best process for our staff as well as the voters.
And I think also we would still maintain the ability to do this ourselves for ones that are received later in the cycle or closer to election day, but this would be, the bulk of the early ones to get them out so that we're not behind the 8 ball with a big burden, correct?
Exactly. We will still have the components to do that. As I said, for all of our absentees, our UOCAVA, which are our military and overseas voters. And then as you get closer to those deadlines, perhaps mid-October forward, we can take part of that as well in-house and do it. So we will have the components to print our ballots. We will have the components. We will make sure we have the people on hand to help stuff them and train them early on so that they understand our coding and the necessity to have the proper ballot with the proper envelope. And we'll do that in the last couple of weeks so that things are moving, again, quickly and efficiently in the mail process, because it's not only our processes we have to consider here and what the election teams are doing, but it's also the Postal Service. They are, also struggling with COVID environment and financial concerns, but they also are dealing with not just Delaware County balloting. They're dealing with all of the counties across Pennsylvania and for the November election across the entire country. So we have to be mindful of the needs and the processes that they have as well. And I think the blending of in-house with the heavy lifting done by MER, especially in the early part, is a really logical and exciting option for us to consider.
And I would add, in the past we've used MER for this printing services. We're expanding the role that they'll take. I don't think the board ever before voted to approve MER for these activities, but I can understand since this is going to be a expansion of that we should at least affirm your administrative decision to do this, and that it's the right thing to do. So could we have a motion for the board to approve your recommendation for the outsourcing of the ballot printing and the mailing of the bulk ballots?
Sorry, this keeps happening.
I can kind of hear you, Ashley.
Okay, then good. Then I will do it. Every time I go to unmute, my computer seems to take me off the screen. I don't even know if you can still see me, but I would so move.
I'll second that.
Is there discussion?
No, thank you.
Hearing no discussion, all those in favor say aye.
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 And hearing everyone say aye, there is no opposed, that motion would carry. The next item on the agenda is the satellite election offices, and it's my understanding that we don't have everything done in order to consider that. And I think we will have to do that at another meeting. I think there's a couple of things that we should look at having another meeting next week, because if we are going to have a satellite election office, it needs time to be set up. So am I right in my understanding that we can't do this today and we need to schedule something else?
I would move the table if that helps.
Okay. So we'll table this.
My understanding. That
yeah. All right.
There are recommendations being developed, but they're not yet to the point where they can be presented.
Okay. So Lorene, we'll move down next to your report, and I guess we'll have to take.
Sorry, Jerry. Can I interrupt Jerry for 1 second?
Yes. Yes.
There have been repeated mentions of, I think that the county council and the county is trying to create a metered printing service to facilitate the mail-in ballots and to facilitate, costs and to limit costs and other efficiencies related to that. I think that is tied to an earlier vote that I believe, for the primary, I know we took. To include postage on the return envelopes for the mail-in ballots. And I know I've expressed very strong opinions about that I think that not including such postage, which Manley shared some of these views, is almost the equivalent of a poll tax, and that they should be included. So to the extent that I believe our vote only covered the primary, I would vote, and if we don't want to move it yet, if you want to table it, but my belief is that we will need to vote again for November, and Manley can correct me if I'm wrong. And if we do, I would move to ultimately, if the timing is right now or not, let me know. But I would like to move to include return postage on the mail-in ballot return envelopes for the November election.
Okay, I'll second it.
The prior vote was limited to the primary. So it would have to be considered again now. And as in the primary, I believe the proposition is a recommendation to county council, since again, they hold the purse strings on that.
Right. Thank you. Then I would, let me clarify my motion again. I would move to recommend to county council that they fund the inclusion of return postage on the mail-in ballot return envelopes for the November election.
Okay, so there's a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Motion moved and seconded. Discussion?
If I can share one point is what the county is considering, and I would recommend is securing a permit that will allow us to put that on the return envelope. So what that gives us is the option is when the envelope or if the envelope is mailed back, we would incur that cost. So rather than metering, which slows the movement of the mail in the last 10 days before the election, the permit would continue with the priority reference to the mail item, but it also only gives the county a debt for what we are actually receiving through the mail. So if someone hand delivers their ballot or utilizes, to void it and go to vote at the precinct, then we're not going to have to incur that cost. Only what is physically mailed and would be charged. So I think that's a good option also to moving forward.
Thank you.
Okay. So I don't know that we need to amend the motion. I think that the motion was to get a permit. Or to recommend getting a permit. So is there any further discussion?
No, I just would incorporate my discussion from the last time. I'm going to not support this to pay for the mail coming back, but the rest of the motion that we made earlier, I'm okay with.
Jerry, we lost you. I'm sorry.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
Okay, so that motion carries. We can go to the next items, which are all part of Lorraine's report. Manley, are we going to need a motion and approval on the equipment?
I think that it can be phrased as a motion to, if Lorraine is going to recommend the purchase of certain equipment, that the motion would be to adopt her recommendation or endorse it and recommend to county council that it fund it.
Okay, so Lorraine, why don't you report and then we'll see where we are.
Okay. Items other than those that we've spoken about that I am going to be requesting purchase is an item. It is the Blue Crest vote by mail stream inserter and Vantage sorter. This is an automated process for the November election. We would have ability to use the sorter. I spoke of that earlier. That'll be on the back end, receiving the ballots back and sorting them ready for canvassing on election day. The system also has options that as the county or as the state shore system grows into their new versions that they're looking forward to in the next year, we'll be able to utilize even more components of this system. It again will save many man hours. It'll increase accuracy of several of the functions, such as the putting all these ballots into the order rather than hand verifying each and every signature. It will give us a file to go for. It will timestamp them, and as a just overall increase efficiency. The first component of it is the mail stream inserter. That is much of what MER will be doing this election for us. But it would be able to be something that we would have in-house that would allow us to handle the tasks moving forward after the November election. So as a complete component, I would ask for the purchase of that Blue Crest inserter and sorter for the elections. We also are asking additional purchase of our voting system, the Heart Verity, additional for their build department. That'll allow more people to be able to have hands-on and help us with creating the ballot files to be printed or sent to MER. So having more of the builds will increase our productivity. Same with additional heart count stations. We purchased a limited number of those for our resolution and capturing write-ins during our tabulation. And with the volume we are seeing with the Act 77 changes, as well as the COVID, additional count stations will allow us to have more hands-on people processing those items. Also asking for additional print stations with the HART system. That would be a component utilized in satellite stations for in-person voting. So if somebody came to our office, it would not be the direct software that we are using, but a more public forward process to print the ballots and work with that voter directly to get a ballot printed while they're in the office or at an election satellite location. And another item we're talking about is additional Verity drives, having gone through the primary and with our logic and accuracy testings that we do here, as well as what Jim does at the warehouse, and as well as the use of the additional drives, which are the memory components that go from equipment to equipment. It was evident that we needed more, that in all of those supporting tasks, more of those are needed than what were purchased originally. So we are asking for that additional item. And then some just various equipment, office equipment to help with sorting or their joggers that will help with the count so that items can be in a well-maintained batch, which will scan and increase efficiency, less jamming of the equipment. So that's a summary of what we're looking for forward to request to make November a successful election.
I would make that motion to accept her recommendation.
And I second it. Carrie, all these I know Lorraine is very invested on improving our process from the primary. So I fully support the equipment that will allow us to do that. Support the recommendation, but I think, have we lost Jerry?
Yeah, I'm a little worried. I was looking at my screen. I think we've lost Jerry.
I can call him in if I need to. I did that the last time we lost him. Hold on, let me see if I can get him. I thought I was having the most technology problems, but he's dialing back in now.
Hi, I'm sorry that call dropped.
No, you were trying to make me look good, Jerry. I thought I was having the most problems. Just so you know, Lorraine finished her report.
Just as I started to talk, I think I may have actually even done it myself, taking it off mute. Because it was right when I started to talk, so it could have been.
So you have a motion and a second, and
yeah.
Support for the purchase of efficiency creating machines for our November election.
And is there discussion on the motion? Sorry. I'm sorry, is there discussion on the motion to recommend purchasing equipment as Lorraine recommended?
No,
okay. All those. You know, I'm sorry. I didn't hear what you said, Jim.
Oh, I just said no, thank you, and then I was just waiting for.
Okay, great. So there being no discussion, we'll call the question. All those in favor? Aye.
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 Aye. So hearing three ayes, the motion carries. Lorene, I think you covered everything in your section, correct?
The only thing we did not talk about is drop boxes, whether or not we want to proceed with the use of drop boxes, and if so, in what model. Having them in our media location, as we did in the primary at the front of the courthouse, as well as the front of the government center building, or did we want them in media and in each precinct on election day, or did we want them in every municipality, a location to be determined.
Is this something we're prepared to discuss today with a recommendation, or would this be better at next week or whenever we schedule another meeting?
I agree with you that I don't think we have a specific, clear enough guidance on what we're recommending in terms of numbers or other things. I do think there's a major concern, though, about purchasing these equipment in time. And because I think that's why we were unable to purchase these drop boxes that we're talking about now. We've talked about them before in other meetings, and not just a small little drop box, but a substantial piece of equipment that's that costs quite a bit of money and could be deployed each election from now on out for this mail-in ballot option. I think, and I understood we were too late last time to purchase them, or they couldn't be ready in time. And so Manley's nodding his head. So the problem is, Jerry, is that I don't know that the deployment of them has yet been recommended to us administratively, but the purchase of them is necessary soon.
Well, let's.
My understanding, and Lorene, I would invite you to address this, but just from a logistics perspective, my understanding is that the window, there were two suppliers. One supplier made a less expensive but less robustly constructed model. The other supplier made a more expensive but more robustly constructed model. That the less robustly constructed model vendor wanted a commitment earlier this week for an order, and that the more robustly constructed vendor model needs a commitment or an LOI or something to that effect, and Lauren, you can explain exactly what, by the end of this week. So the question certainly could be to, if this board wants to proceed with drop boxes, and given the apparently time-sensitive nature, the board could essentially recommend the purchase or the adoption of whatever administrative recommendation comes out of the Bureau, having, once it completes its analysis and obtains any legal input it needs on this point. I think that the concern is if it is not authorized by this board, given the board's role in making election decisions, there could be a timing problem, because we'll obviously not be in a position to meet again as a board with the appropriate notice requirements by these deadlines that I understand are in place to get the equipment ordered.
That is a fair assessment, yes.
I would support such a motion. I think it's ultimately, Manley, maybe now I'm interfering with your motion, but I think perhaps it's a recommendation to County Council that they adopt the recommendations of the administrative team.
That I think is correct.
I'm not comfortable with this at all. I mean, I feel like I'm voting about something I don't know anything about in terms of a very important issue, and I'm not comfortable voting on it.
Well, I suppose down this way, if you want any drop boxes for voters in November of any kind, then that decision has to be made by somebody by this week.
And these are the drop boxes, to be clear, Lorraine, these are the drop boxes that Jim had suggested he preferred at the meeting in which we decided to deploy the scanning boxes at every precinct. He had said that Montgomery County is using these larger, substantial boxes in other locations. This is akin to those boxes. Is that not right?
Correct.
Yeah, I just want to make myself clear. I don't prefer the drop boxes at all. If we had to have them, I want to have the most secure ones we can have, but I'm not a big fan of the drop boxes. So, while I said I would prefer to have a more robust or more safe box that maybe like that Montgomery County uses. I'm not a fan of those drop boxes at all.
But for a point of reference, the type we're talking about is, if you're familiar with the items the counties have had across the county for the prescription disbursement, or the unused prescription medicine that they want to purge, they can put them in drop boxes across the county at various, I think it might be police stations and things like that. It's that type of item. It's a very large, heavy duty metal piece of equipment that also it can be secured to an outside location. It's weather resistant, and would recommend also that it have some sort of video monitor so that we can make sure that no harm comes to it or the ballots inside of it. And also there's a monitoring system for how it's being utilized.
My determination from a legal perspective is that having that active monitoring is an essential requirement of this Dropbox deployment.
Yeah, I'm coming back to the same thing, but I've not seen them. I don't know how much they cost. I don't know how many we're ordering. I just don't think we're in a position to vote on this.
Can we answer those questions?
Yeah, I hope
Just going through the files now. For the larger, the heavy duty component, as I described, a quote for 10, and that was just to have an easy multiplier as far, would be 28,700 and some dollars. So that would be for 10. So depending on what our vision was, or what we wanted to refer to council for their vision, it is we could possibly order less and have them strictly in the media location, or you could order more, have one in every precinct, or not every precinct, in every municipality. And then I guess there's discussion as to whether we'd have a similar model with the black box by mail ballot drop box as we use in the primary at every precinct on election day. But that would be a different component altogether.
I mean, I don't want to forego the opportunity to have these larger drop boxes. I don't think that they're just ultimately for November. I think we've discussed this. I mean, mail-in voting is going to continue in Pennsylvania, and these are long-term solutions. The question of how we, for the first time, deploy them and create the appropriate and necessary security measures around them are the details that haven't been discussed. But I thought we've been talking about these boxes for a long time, and frankly, if 10 costs, I know they're not insignificant, but they're actually coming in at a rate less than what I thought it was. Originally, I thought it was $3,000 to $5,000. So per
What
box.
are they? Did that include the cameras, or is that just the boxes?
The 28,000 for 10 would be just the boxes. That is, what we had quoted out for the boxes, not for the video component.
And then
but Jerry, you're right. But I think that the question of deployment is also whether we can gain other cost savings by deploying them at locations that are also otherwise secure and perhaps even either owned by the county or secured by a municipal office. So those details haven't been worked out, but if we don't purchase them now, we won't have that option. And I know we're going to vote at some point, or I'm going to vote at some point that we need them, in not just the short term, but in the long term. So to me, Jerry, I don't know your views on this, but I think that this is a long-term investment in the county for the election process for mail-in voting, and gives us an opportunity to deploy them in November that will be lost. Unfortunately, it sounds like if we don't, based on what Manley described. I mean, I am disappointed. I didn't know the deadline was this week, but I don't want to miss an opportunity to create these secure opportunities for mail-in voting for November.
When we first discussed these things in the spring, I was kind of skeptical about the use of the boxes, and I had a lot of concerns about security and so forth. Having seen how the spring played out, both in our county and in other counties like Montgomery County that uses these boxes, they do seem to be a convenience and a help to the public. that, people don't have to go to the post office. Obviously, if we are putting postage on things with a permit and somebody drops it in a drop box, we just saved 50 cents or whatever the permit postage rate is. I know it's a little cheaper than that. So they do contribute to real cost savings with people being able to return their ballots through them. I think it's going to be important to determine where the appropriate place to put them is. Obviously, if they're in a county building and the county police are visually observing them, they're pretty secure. If you put them on a desolate highway down by the river somewhere, they're a little less secure. So, security is a concern, and how you approach that is going to be significant. I don't know that it's the Board of Elections is going to decide the placement of the boxes. It would seem to me that's somewhat an administrative thing in determining where the boxes go. I don't know about that. I don't know what the law says specifically about that. It would seem kind of burdensome for us to have to look at the placement of each box. Maybe it would be the kind of thing where we get a recommendation of, here's 20 places, and we consider them the same as we do polling locations or something like that. It's difficult today to figure out the best approach, given these kind of extraordinary deadlines. Maybe if there was a motion to buy a number of them, and then we could determine later where to use them, if there's ability to return them. I mean, ultimately, we're recommending that they be bought. We're not the ones that are buying them. The council is going to have to approve the purchase of them. I don't want us to be an impediment to getting them if we don't act today, but it's challenging for me to figure out how we can act today.
I suspect there's a cost to installing them as well, is there? Lorraine?
I do not have that answer. I can find that out.
But I mean, if they're
some discussion at the joint working sessions, Jim, and my understanding is there will be a cost of the box. There will be a cost to install each box, and there is a cost to for boxes that aren't actively monitored by some other camera system or security, like park police at the courthouse, for example, if it's in the lobby or something. There would be a cost for having appropriate security cameras or other equipment installed in connection with the box to ensure that it's monitored. That's I think that's to have those boxes appropriately monitored is my conclusion of a requirement under the law, a practical requirement to ensure that these ballots are protected and to dissuade them from being tampered with. Obviously, there are criminal penalties for people who tamper with these ballots, but you obviously also want to take reasonable measures to protect them on top of simply the imposition of criminal penalties. Right. So you're right, there are additional costs associated with these things, and those need to be accounted for. The question I believe that is before this body is if this body believes that boxes should be put into use for the November general election, this body should vote to recommend that appropriate boxes be purchased so that they're available. And I don't see any reason to believe that this body couldn't authorize the purchase of the number of boxes that county council determined it was comfortable purchasing, since they hold the purse strings. I think that would be an appropriate motion. I think without some statement from this board on the deployment and use of these types of boxes, it's likely not there's likely that's going to become an impediment to their use or their acquisition.
I agree with you, Manley, and I think
required by county council, but I think there would need to be some statement by this board that it chooses to deploy them.
I mean, we've talked about trying to deploy these. It wasn't an option last time. I think, Jim, ultimately, whether you thought they were the best option or not, you certainly endorsed them as being a better option than the one that ultimately we ended up deploying. I think we will lose the opportunity to do them at all. I think they're a long-term investment for the county. I would recommend, though, I think, Jim, to your concerns, that the recommendation include that county council be presented with a complete picture of the cost so that they can make that decision. They are aware of their resources. They are aware of locations where they have buildings and security and cameras. But things like installation, they should be presented with fairly as part of the presentation of just the boxes, or at least made aware of all of the concerns and all the areas where costs might arise, so that they can make their decision fully informed. But I would recommend that we not miss this opportunity to at least have them for November and then for the long term. And so I recommend that our administrative team put together a recommendation to county council. I think they have. Do they have a meeting coming up in which they would vote on this? I believe they do. Lorraine?
Next Wednesday, the 5th.
So as part of my recommendation, I would ask that they be given this information, Lorraine, not just on the cost of the boxes themselves and the pricing out, but also at least be noted that there are installation costs, that there are security costs and legal requirements around that, so that they can make a fully informed decision about how to spend the county's money. But I think certainly in the long term, this is an option we should have in the county for mail-in voting.
I think we're doing an end run around our responsibilities. I think that we should be as informed as county council is on what kind of money we're spending. We're in charge of carrying out the election. I don't have enough information here before me about the safety of these boxes, the cost of these boxes, where these boxes are going to go. And I'm not comfortable making a vote just with all those questions out there.
I don't think, Manley, just to be clear, we're not abdicating that responsibility, right? I mean, ultimately, first of all, we know they've been deployed successfully in multiple other counties. I mean, Philadelphia, Montgomery County, I can't tell you how many pictures I've seen of people dropping their mail-in ballot proudly during the primary into one of the types of boxes we're talking about. But Manley, in terms of our responsibility, I want to be clear on this because I'm not trying to abdicate that in any way. Isn't it that ultimately, though, we would need to decide on how they're actually deployed? So if county council says we want to do the 10 boxes and here are the places where we have the capacity to keep them secure, to install them and keep them secure in the ways required under the law, we would ultimately be the ones to decide whether to do that. Am I wrong about that?
No, I think that's correct. I think that there is a question, for example, let's say in a hypothetical scenario, this board were to determine that each municipality should have the opportunity to receive a box. A question as to whether to put it on the northwest corner of the municipal building property or the southwest corner of the municipal building property might be a level of detail that could be determined administratively. But the question of or the broader policy that each municipality would be offered a box would be one for this board. Now, in a scenario where you're talking about acquiring fewer boxes than there are municipalities, or using something other than a boxes as a function of number of voters in a municipality type of matrix, that would be, a one size fits all type of rule that you could apply generically, and you have to pick which 10 municipalities get boxes or which 5. Then I think the board would have to be involved in that determination of which 5 or 10 municipalities within the county get those boxes. Yes.
But by that time, we'll have spent at least $28,000. And if we decide, hey, we're not going to use the boxes, then we wasted $28,000. Where it's like buying a car without knowing how to drive. I mean, just saying, I'll take a car and deliver it to me. I'll pay you some number. I'm not quite sure what that number is going to be, but I don't know what options I have. And I don't really know how to drive the car or what I'm going to do with it. But let's buy it so we have it. I mean, that just doesn't seem fair to taxpayers to me. And I can't make an informed decision like this.
Look, I agree that it's complicated. I don't think we were presented with all the information we need, Jim. So, I mean, the question is, are we here today? Is what I'm hearing, Manley, from what you said, is the proposals, or Lorraine, that we will literally be able to purchase this equipment in time for November if we don't make a decision today. Because I do agree with Jim that ultimately it is very awkward, because that question, Manley, that you've asked isn't even presented to us as a possibility of whether or not we can choose between municipalities or regional or anything else. We don't have the data to do that. I agree with you, Jim. We don't have the data to do that today.
Well, one issue, I suppose, is as we consider this question, that since the purchasing of the box is a matter for county council, the county council would, I suppose, be entirely free to acquire these boxes because it holds the purse strings and make that decision and acquire whatever number of boxes it chose to acquire. And then the matter would come to this board to determine whether to deploy them, and if so, where.
Okay, that to me seems to take into consideration Jim's concerns and the other concerns about the lack of information we have. Jerry, I don't know your view on it. I can't see your face, but I think perhaps given the lack of information we have to make decisions about deployment and use of them today, I actually prefer that if county council wants to purchase them as a long-term investment in the county, then they make that decision and we decide ultimately whether we deploy them or not.
It didn't answer my question, and I'm not any more informed now than I was before, and I'm going to abstain from this vote because I don't think we can.
I think at this point now it's not necessarily going to be a vote. I think, Manley, your recommendation was that we can't. I think we've come to an impasse where we don't have the information we need to take any vote on this issue specific enough to be worthy of a vote. And if that's the case, then we don't take a vote. And if county council says, hey, we've decided to purchase boxes, election board, you have the opportunity to use them in November or not. That's their decision on how they spend the county funds. And we will make decisions based on what we have available to us, if anything.
I'm okay with that. We're going to take no action then today. Okay, fine. So I guess, Lorene, that's it for your portion of the agenda. Jim, are you ready for your polling places?
I am. Good morning again.
Morning.
It's still morning, right?
Yeah.
So we have several municipalities that I'm going to present to you. I don't know if you want to vote for them municipality by municipality or present them all as one group. We have no petitions to present. These are all to be considered as a recommendation by the board. I'll go through them in alphabetical order.
Yeah, why don't we do them all, Jim? And if anybody has issues with any of them, we'll take them off the list. I mean, we'll do all the ones with no issues, and if there's any issues, we'll just take them up separately, okay?
All right, I'll go through them in alphabetical order. Darby Township, we have a bipartisan agreement to request that the changes that were made for the primary election remain in place for the general election. This would move Darby Township 2 from the Darby Township Library to the Darby Township Community Center. It would move Darby Township 3-1 from Goodwill Fire Company to Darby Township School. Darby Township 3-2 from Evangelical Assembly of God Church to Darby Township School. Darby Township 4 would move from Darby Township Old Municipal Building to Darby Township School. And Darby Township 5-1 and 5-2 would move from Briarcliff Fire Company to Darby Township School. I sent you a document that has all the addresses associated with these locations. That's the entirety of the moves in Darby Township.
And you said
Marcus
bipartisan, right, Jim? Jim, you said it was a bipartisan recommendation?
It's a bipartisan agreement, correct. Marcus Hook. Marcus Hook, we had a problem in the primary election where we had moved all four precincts in Marcus Hook to the Marcus Hook Rec Center at 7th and Market Street. And there have been numerous conversations, including the Republican chair or co-chair, Josephine Laird, the borough manager, Andrew Weldon, several members of the local election boards. These conversations were both prior to and subsequent to the primary election. We hosted them here at the warehouse to have a discussion, to look at the equipment, try and figure out how to configure their polling place. And there's universal agreement that the Marcus Hook Rec Center was not a suitable location. They made it work for the primary. It just won't work for the general. The recommendation from all of them, this was a unanimous agreement, was to move all of the Marcus Hook precinct. There still are concerns about staffing the local election boards due to health concerns. So the recommendation is to move all 4 to a new location, which is the Marcus Hook Community Center. My staff has went out and conducted ADA accessibility survey, which is fine. I sent you that also. So Marcus Hook 1 is proposed to move from Cokesbury United Methodist Church. Marcus Hook 2 from the Marcus Hook Rec Center. Marcus Hook 3 from the Municipal Building. Marcus Hook 4 from the Marcus Hook Fire Department. And all 4 of those would move to the Marcus Hook Community Center. Middletown Township, we have 4 locations that were senior living facilities that were moved as part of the mass consolidation, not prior to. So they all reverted back to the senior living facilities and need to be moved. The proposal here is that we keep them where they voted in the primary. So that's Middletown 3-1 at Riddle Village would move to Glenwood Elementary School. Middletown 3-3, Granite Farms Estates would also move to Glenwood Elementary School. Middletown 4-1, Lima Estates would move to Eastern Seals of Southeastern PA. Middletown 4-3, Fair Acres would move to the Middletown Municipal Building. Again, these are all, I guess you'd call this a recommendation from me to remain where they voted in the primary. We cannot move them back to vulnerable populations. And in fact, in the case of Middletown 3-3 and Middletown 4-1, Granite Farms Estates and Lima Estates, we have received a letter from the company that manages these facilities that they no longer wish to be a polling place, period, at all moving forward. So that's Middletown. Newtown Township, we have bipartisan agreement in place. They want to, some of these historical locations are not available. There's concerns about local election boards, and there's a bipartisan agreement in place to remain where they voted in the primary election. So that would move Newtown 1 from Newtown Public Library to Marple Newtown High School. Newtown 3, Newtown Square Presbyterian Church to the Gauntlet Center. Newtown 4, Newtown Township Building to Marple Newtown High School. Newtown 5, Newtown Square Fire Company to Marple Newtown High School. Newtown 6, Newtown Square Presbyterian Church to the Gauntlet Center, and Newtown 8, Knights of Columbus also to the Gauntlet Center. Again, these are all where they voted in the primary, and there is a bipartisan agreement for these changes. At least 2 of those locations are not available even, and I think that's the Presbyterian Church and the Fire Company. Last recommendation for moves comes from bipartisan agreement from Ridley Township. This would move Ridley Township 1-3 from Fairview AME Church to Knights of Columbus. I'll have a comment about that when I get through these. Ridley Township 3-1 from the Ridley School District Administration Building to the Ridley Community Center. That is where they voted in the primary. Ridley Township 3-2 from Edgewood Elementary School to Ridley Community Center, also where they voted in the primary. Ridley Township 9-1, Calvary Independent Baptist Church to Amos Land Elementary School, which is where they voted in the primary. The comment for Ridley Township 1-3, Fairview AME Church was one of the locations where we actually showed up with the voting equipment and had slipped through the cracks, I guess, somehow, and they were not able or not will or understandably not willing to host. And we literally like made the move. The next stop on the delivery route was Woodland Fire Company, and we called Woodland Fire Company, and they said, sure, we'll host 2 precincts. So we sent them there, and we notified everybody, went out and hung signs, and did what we could. But both party leaders from Ridley Township agreed that the Woodland Fire Company space was not large enough for 2 precincts to provide for voter privacy and social distancing, and certainly we expect that will be worse of a problem in the general election than it was in the primary. So they both agreed that the Knights of Columbus would be a more appropriate location. So that is the moves that we have. Just so you know, the party leaders, the county party leaders have been notified that these changes were going to be presented. Signs have been posted at the old polling locations and the proposed new polling locations by my staff. That was done by Friday of last week. There is one other thing that I feel I have a duty to mention. We notified the public by posting signs that we were going to present a change for Eddystone. There was a misunderstanding and that misunderstanding was on my part. I take full responsibility for it, that there was a bipartisan agreement in place. And I subsequently found out after hanging the signs that that bipartisan agreement is still being discussed and is not actually in place yet. So it may be still to come, but in case anybody from Eddystone had sent in public comment or has tuned into this meeting, it's not being presented, and that's the reason. So the moves that I'm presenting for your consideration are Darby Township, Marcus Hook, Middletown Township, Newtown Township, and Ridley Township. Any questions?
Do we have a motion to approve?
Yes.
Is there a second?
Yes.
Any discussion?
Just very briefly, Jim, I think in an administrative meeting, I know I've expressed some of this, but one is I understood, if you could confirm that the bipartisan municipal leaders or election leaders who informed you of these agreements that you're recommending, they had indicated to you in writing that the polling location had confirmed that they would maintain their status as a polling location regardless of pandemic conditions in November, potentially getting worse again like they were in the primary, and that second to that, that you were nonetheless, we were going to find somebody to help confirm directly with the owners of those locations that was the case. Is that right?
That's correct. Next week we will start personally reaching out to double check and make sure that we're okay with all these locations. Any of them that involve a school, we have a separate communication out countywide to the school districts to have a larger discussion on them.
And then as to Eddystone and any potential confusion from the brief sign posting, I think ultimately the voters will be notified of the location changes through voter registration. And I know voter registration is not here right now, but is that, do you know that to be correct, Jim or Lorraine?
So the plan is, as soon as this meeting's over, my staff will go out and remove the signs that indicate that there's a proposal to change it. In the coming days, if there's an agreement in place, we will repost signs and notify people that'll be presented at the August meeting. And all of these changes that we will consider today and at the August meeting, Voter Reg will send new voter registration cards to all the voters in these precincts that indicates their new polling location.
And so that brings just my last point. We discussed this at an administrative meeting, but I don't think we've resolved it, and I don't think we need to here, but I just want to note it. For those polling locations that are actually reverting from their temporary location in the primary back to their regular location, I think there's some confusion about how to make sure voters know that that's the case. Of course, when we moved them temporarily, we were clear that that was a temporary move and for the primary only, but Voter Reg wouldn't necessarily send them a new card, or I don't know if they would. So one thing for the long-term administrative consideration is making sure that the voters who aren't going to get a notice that this is your new polling location permanently do get some sort of notice that you are reverting back to your original regular polling location for the general, so that they're not confused and don't end up going to the location they went to in the primary.
I share that concern, and I think it's probably the duty of all of you on the board to sort of have that discussion and give Voter Reg just direction on how to minimize the confusion, whether we send postcards again to those voters or what. I'll leave that up to you. We don't do, the only interaction we have from our department is the posting of the signs.
That's right, but
Okay.
Voter Reg is not, the leader of Voter Reg is not available for that discussion. So I just wanted to note it here so that everybody understands. We do need administratively, I believe, to figure out how best to get that notice out to those voters.
Right.
Okay, we could take that up. Let's with the motion on the table now. Is there any discussion on the motion to approve these changes?
No, thank you.
No.
Okay. Ashley, anything else?
Yeah.
Then I'll call the question. All those in favor of approving the changes, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Hearing 3 ayes, the motion carries. So, Jim, do you have anything else for your report?
No, I just so you're aware, I'm continuing to work with a number of municipalities out there. I expect that you'll have more votes to take in the August meeting than this one. We still do have about a half a dozen or so precincts out there that are currently homeless. We're working on that. Some of them were from the primary and then just ended up in that mass consolidation. So they're issues that we were already aware of. Some of them are places that, for various reasons, have told us that they're unable to host or whatever. So we're working through all of that. And for anybody tuning in and listening to the Board of Elections meetings, we have one empty staff position here at the warehouse. So if you're interested, apply. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Before we go to the public comment, we discussed having to meet again, hopefully next week. Can everyone do next Thursday morning?
I personally have a call, a Zoom meeting with Department of State at 9:30.
I can do this.
I can as well.
I have a question. We would still have a meeting prior to Labor Day if we have one next week, right?
Yes, exactly. I mean, if you have something for next week, Jim, we could do it next week, but we're still going to have that end of the summer meeting.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Get the most of them done. So if 9:30 doesn't work, would 10:30 work for everyone?
That works for me.
For me too.
It's okay for me too.
Okay, so Lorraine, would you notice next Thursday, 10:30 for Zoom? I can't imagine we'll be back in the courthouse by then. Is there any other business before public comment?
No, thanks.
No.
Okay, hearing none. Lorraine, is there public comment?
Yes. Okay, the first one is from Colleen Ghani, Chairwoman of the Democratic Party in Delaware County. She writes, "Dear election board members, thank you for your continued service. I write to respectfully request that you consider installing drop boxes for set up early voting centers in locations around the county. In addition to the courthouse and media, 2 other helpful locations would be Department of Human Services office in Upper Darby, that would be on 69th Street, as well as Chester City Hall at 1 East 4th Street in Chester. This will facilitate safe and secure voting during the current pandemic." The next,
Okay.
oh, sorry.
Thank you. I should note we did approve Upper Darby before, and so that will happen, and we're going to consider other places next week.
Okay. The next voter is Patricia Donnelly for Ridley Park. She asks, "How do I apply to work for the next election?" I would recommend, Ms. Donnelly, if you contact the county personnel department and perhaps look on the county's website under personnel. I believe they are advertising the various jobs available in the three divisions: voter registration, Bureau of Elections, and voting machine warehouse. And Ms. Kowski from the League of Women Voters writes, "The Delaware County League of Women Voters would like to thank all Delaware County election officials for all of the effort and support to put forth to conduct the 2020 Pennsylvania primary for Delaware County voters. In order to learn about Delaware County voters' experience, we conducted a survey with the intent of sharing the results with Delaware County election officials. The survey opened mid-June and closed the beginning of July 2020. At the close of the survey, 300 voters responded. The direct link to the survey summary page on the League of Women Voters of Delaware County website is included in this email. That email, and I will check with the league to make sure that we can maybe post this on our webpage so voters can access that directly. And it says, based on the survey response, the league has made specific recommendations, which we encourage you to review in order to provide a voting experience that is safe, fair, and secure for all. Thank you for your considerations to our recommendations. The League of Women Voters of Delaware County."
Thank you, and thank you to the league for all that they have done to help and support us.
And Lorraine, when you post that link, would you mind circulating the results to the board so that we can review them as requested?
Certainly.
I'd like to do that. Thank you.
Okay. The next comment is from Jolie Kimsey Carroll. She writes, "What happened to the mail-in ballots that never arrived to voters? I applied for mine in April and was told it was mailed in mid-May, but it never arrived, even to this day." Ms. Carroll, I could certainly look up the information in the SHORE system, but it sounds like you do have those details that it was processed. Unfortunately, I can't speak for the Postal Service. We regret that you did not receive that ballot, but I would contact the Bureau of Elections, 610-891-4673, to verify that we have that correct mail to address. As I said, there were some glitches with the state system in apartments. I don't know if anything like that could have affected it, but just to have our eyes on your application again for the November election to make sure everything on our end is as accurate as possible. The next item is from a Mary Clinton. She says, "What PPE will be provided to election board workers on election day for November 3rd? I believe Jim spoke to that. Is there anything more anybody wishes to share on that matter?
I actually skipped over that. I apologize. The PPE kits, we're in discussion now to the procurement process is in place, and I will be having discussions this week on exactly what will be provided, but it will be, gloves, masks, face shields, sanitizing wipes, spray, everything that was provided, I guess, for the primary election. And we're also in discussions with how this will be delivered. We're going to try and have this delivered rather than a separate delivery, which was a big problem in the primary election. They will come through this department and hopefully be delivered with the voting equipment. Sorry, I forgot to mention that.
Thank you, Jim. All right, the next request is from Peggy Braden Wilson. I understand that the process for the judge of elections to drop off returns was pretty awful. Some weren't able to get home until early morning. What plans do you have for that process? I know that the county has looked at the, evaluated the returns. I know Mr. Lawrence spoke directly to those issues in the last meeting and put out the whole board put out a very direct comment on their disappointment in that and the impact it had on the voters, the poll workers for that end of evening experience. Obviously, we are evaluating that. I know Crystal has been working very hard with other county officials to redesign that to see what's going to happen with the move. There are several options that we're considering what we can do with that. So that is something we definitely have identified as an area that needs improvement. But at this moment, I cannot say that we have a nailed down experience, but know that we are definitely making that a priority to improve that. And again, everyone apologizes for that experience.
And I hope that we can present that in one of these meetings, perhaps in August or even closer to the election. What our proposed solution is to those issues, because we are very mindful of how serious they were.
Okay, thank you. The next item is from Betty Ann Director. I requested it. Let's see. Okay, at the header, she says, is there a way to reverse my request for a mail-in ballot? Yes, on our website, the Delaware County Bureau of Elections webpage, under mail-in ballot options, there is a form that you can recall your request to receive an automatic ballot. You can fill that out, mail that in, and we will then remove it from the state system so that you do not receive an automatic ballot. But we do need that form completed. If you have any questions, call the Bureau and the staff will be able to walk you through or mail out that form if you need us to do so. Terry Baraldi, will poll workers on election night need to make returns in the news space or in media? Again, that is still being discussed. It is a point we had looked at, and how the return process will be done is, as again, something we're really looking actively in what our options are. Next question is during the primary, is from Livia Smith from Chester. During the primary, many people had to wait long hours to pick up and return election day materials. Will this process be streamlined? Ms. Smith, I think we've addressed that in a prior one, but thank you for your inquiry on that. And as Board Member Lungenheimer has suggested, we will work to have a diagram and a process established sooner rather than later to let everybody know what our options are. Next item is from Elaine Hume. I did not get my ballot in time to mail back, so I used the voting box. Okay, so hopefully that did work well for you, Ms. Hume, and that's a good example of what it was there to do. So thank you for sharing that experience with us. Next item is again from Ms. Smith, Livia Smith from Chester. Did not hear about Chester. What's the status? I'm not sure if that's referencing to the new building location, and I believe that is being been approved or been supported by the board here in today's meeting, and then council will be confirming that further next week at their meeting.
I would have thought she maybe meant about precincts and polling locations. Is that possible? Okay. That would have been my assumption.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Does anybody have anything to share with that?
Jim.
It was discussed on yesterday's election project team call, and it's being worked on.
Okay. Thank you. Next one is states that it's a three-part question from Chris Jackson. To whom is Delaware County Board of Elections primarily responsive? Example, taxpayers, voters, residents, or county council. Second question is, to what extent are the interests of taxpayers properly considered by the board? And third, how does the board balance those taxpayer interests against the interests of voters and residents? Although it seems intuitive that interests primarily of concern to the board should be either Delaware County voters and residents. However, concerns expressed during the meeting have been with respect to efforts on taxpayers. Concerns for taxpayer interests would seem to be secondary in light to the board's primary focus. Thank you, Chris Jackson. Next question is the follow-up from Mary Clinton. I forgot to, she forgot to add her address. Ms. Clinton is from Media, I believe Upper Providence Township. So thank you, Ms. Clinton. And the next item is Ms. Smith also identifying, Ashley, you were correct about the polling locations. So Jim has already addressed that. And that is all we have here for public comments.
All right. Is there any further business?
I have none.
Okay. There being none, I guess we are adjourned to our next meeting next week. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.